Hello there guys and welcome back to the channel. So it's June, it's champion ranking series. We are here with third video. We are going to be doing 2022 champions ranked part 2, as in the best of the 2022 champions. As always, obviously it's always hard to gauge the champions, overall value or place in a game initially after they get released. Many of those champions do take a while to shine, and that's why I always find it worthwhile to revisit previous year's rankings. Keep in mind, these are my own personal views of the game mixed in with my experience and current game relevance and trends based on which champions I see used more, which champions I see doing the best, and so forth. But ultimately, it obviously has some subjective element to it as well. And that said, before we jump any further, do not miss your opportunity to win $100 for July 4th, and it's super simple to enter this $300 giveaway. Number 1, be a subscriber of my channel. Number 2, open Evizone link in the video description and join it, and then basically just face me in a duel, take a screenshot and send it in the thread, which is what the link in the description is meant for. You have until July 2nd to enter, and the results will be posted on July the 4th. Super simple, very easy. Take advantage of it. Evizone is an awesome service, so you'd be doing yourself a massive favor right there. That said, here we can see the previous year's rankings, and we already revisited basically the revisited worst champions. And here we can see how I ranked them before. So start from Captain Britain, went all the way up to Shuri, who is significantly better after her buff. But we still need to take a look at the best champions of year 2022 and how those rankings have changed, because they definitely have. Some champions have lost ground, some champions have gained ground, in my opinion. And let's take a look at all of that stuff. So in spot number 12, and this is first bit where I'm immediately gonna start controversies. And that's kind of the point of these videos. They are meant to be food for thought. And I can hear people running at me already in comment section that I have insulted their family's heritage, and that my soul is destined to burn in the depths of hell for the insults that I'm about to provide people's opinions. But spot number 12 is I do. I'm sorry, the dude was insanely overhyped upon his release, and there is no real comparison between Dr. Doom and I do. That doesn't mean he's a bad champion. Again, every single champion in this list is what I would consider a good to an amazing champion. Some of them are incredible and top of the game champions, and yeah, every single one is already in the second half. But still, spot number 12 for year 2022, in my opinion, goes to iDoom. And the reason for that is because I just don't see him doing all that well pretty much anywhere, unless there's some specific condition. The dude is perfectly built to destroy Bishop, unlike half of the other new tech champions, and you can give him props for that. And he is definitely interacting well with the new defensive tactic. But pretty much other than that, when you're taking a look at him, there are tons of ways he gets wrecked on defense by most random of the opponents. And offensively, he is also reliant on quite a few things and cooperative AI, and his damage isn't all that great either. He's hardly the fastest and speediest attackers, which automatically kind of, lowers him a bit on offensive side, and on defensive side as well. He's not that hard to beat. So ultimately, we are left with a champion that has like one very, very, very specific niche or best case scenario, and pretty much everything else is just kind of average or slightly above average. Also, he definitely suffers from completely useless level 1, which is one of the most annoying things Kabam often likes to do, is for champions like this, his level 1 is effectively useless unless you go for like a full level 3 loop. So in 9 fights out of 10, there is a completely useless special attack. And that is one of the biggest differentiating factors from him and Dr. Doom, because Dr. Doom, number 1, benefits from Mystic Dispersion, which obviously in many fights can supercharge him. But also number 2, his level 1 is kind of like vital to get his rotation started. And taking this out of it, it just slows down the entire character and makes him less potent. Obviously, there are good things in his kit. I'm fully aware, you know, it's nice to have the Incinerate and Shock immunity and, you know, ability to chain in your heavy on your base combo. Access to cowardice can be helpful. All that stuff, it's nice. It's just not quite up to par. And it's a bit of a shame because I think he's a very, very cool character. I took him to rank 5. Now, admittedly, took him to rank 5 because of prestige primarily. But at the time, I also thought he will be slightly better. But even as a rank 5, he just doesn't really stack up most of my rank 4s or some rank 3s in terms of performance across the game modes. And I think one of the biggest issues with him that really annoys me is his ability to inflict energy vulnerability. And it only activates when opponent gains 2 prowesses at the same time. And that's such a niche scenario. And it's like basically specifically targeted for Bishop. If it would be remove 2 prowess on contact too, so if you could just, you know, remove any 2 prowesses that are gained at any given time upon, you know, making contact with the opponent or something like that, he'd be much, much, much better. But yeah, I think that energy vulnerability is the key that makes him, you know, very, very good against Bishop and could make him good against a ton of other champions if he could, you know, stack those energy vulnerabilities in relatively average matchup. You know, perhaps integrate it in one of his special attacks as well or something. But without it, he just seems somewhat lackluster. And again, I do have a rank 5. I do use him. I do try to force myself to use him because I have a rank 5. And he just isn't all that great. He's not awful by any means. He's not garbage. He's not prestige only champion. But he's also not at the top of the class or top of the yearly release. Come at me, iDoom fanboys. Right, let's move on. After iDoom, I am going to be putting in another champion that is a fan favorite, and it's Black Cat. And Black Cat is a champion that I actually really do love and enjoy. And I have found her to be useful in quite a few different situations. The thing that I think Black Cat kind of struggles with is that in practical terms, there is that build-up process and very limited amount of damage that she does until she kind of gets that level 2 sorted, until he gets her like sabotage or whatever it's called on the opponent. And as an end result, even if she matches up, she's just often not quite fast enough. I love using Black Cat, for instance, in Battlegrounds. But the reality is, most of the time, I do end up leaving her out of my deck just because 8 and Valkyrie and, you know, a handful of other champions do pretty much the same things, but kind of faster and better. Now, the fact that I love about Black Cat, however, is that she does take a ton of very tricky matchups, and there are situations when she turns into an absolute monster. I love using Black Cat against champions like Rintra and Hulkling and Thing, and you can even use her if you really want against Man-Thing, and she's a great Nick Fury killer. And yeah, in any meta that's not a complete nuke meta, and if she's compatible with it, she can be an amazing, amazing champion to run. But in kind of like flat out race, yeah, she just kind of loses out to Valkyrie, she loses out to Kate, she loses out to several other champions. And kind of unfortunate if she was a wee bit faster. But we are here. Still an amazing champion, and she definitely gets major props for style points. She's one of the most satisfying champions to play. As I mentioned, does cover a lot of very, very, very tricky matchups. And I love the fact that you can run her unawakened. She doesn't have major reliance on her ability either. And yeah, I think she's awesome. I think she's relatively straightforward. And she, again, I believe, was a victim of complete mischaracterization upon her release, where 90% of the footage of her and hype around her was basically focused around, look at that, she can nuke this labyrinth fight or something, when I do not think the character is about that at all. The character is much more about problem solving and playing much more simple style as well with basic, you know, getting like that one intercept or one special punish and then drop level 2 and you're going to be doing awesome things. I do hope that the new relic can speed her up to a reasonable degree because she has a tremendously good interaction with the new Black Widow relic. And yeah, I definitely look forward to playing more with her because, as I said, she is incredibly fun and awesome champion that has plenty of use in the game. It's just that there are also some shortcomings there. Moving further, and again, I'm going to be pissing off everybody today, but what has to be done has to be done. And in spot number 10, I'm going to be putting in Quicksilver. And the thing with Quicksilver is, and people have been making this case to me a whole bunch of times, like, Quicksilver is the best science champion because he does these 50 different things. And to me, my answer is Psycho Man does 50 things, and Jubilee does 50 things, and Ronin does 27 things, and neither one of those champions are particularly amazing. Not, you know, well, not, they are completely garbage, some of them anyway. Definitely, they're not amazing. And the thing with Quicksilver is, yes, he can do a lot. Bypass miss, stop unstoppable, he can stop evade, he can, you know, deal with power gain effects, doesn't gain precision buff, therefore he can have many very good Mystic matchups. Does a lot of things. Problem is, in virtually every game mode, maybe outside of Alliance War, he just doesn't do them well enough, kind of. Like, if we break it down, in Battlegrounds, offensively, he hardly gets used. If he is in the deck, it's primarily as a defender, which is, you know, kind of funny that with all of these, you know, utilities listed, champion's strongest aspect in the most competitive game mode is still he evades on defense. But he's just not fast enough for Battlegrounds. Okay, so that's one game mode where he doesn't really do the best on offense. Then if you're going to be doing questing, well, you're probably going to want to use like Human Torch or Scorpion or some other science champion that doesn't have to do, you know, heavy attack, 30 dashbacks, level 1, level 2, medium, light, medium, wait for big detonation. It's just a lot of kerfuffle. And on top of it, a lot of people just can't get themselves to really like this guy because of his weird combo throws. And the annoying part with Quicksilver is also that despite being quote-unquote the speedy character, landing a single combo with Quicksilver takes significantly more time than landing a combo with a regular champion who does 5 hits in his combo, because this one does 13 and the animations are longer, which obviously takes some time to adjust, but it also increases the time you get to your level 2. It increases the time you get to your level 1. So, in a sense, he's the slowest character in the game, at the very least from the point of view is, let's say, how quickly you can gain 2 bars of power. If you're fighting against like a vanilla champion dummy and you take every single character in the game, how quickly you can get to 2 bars of power, I think Quicksilver would be one of the slowest ones because of how long his combos take to throw. And things like that matter. Ultimately, we do see him now and then used in Alliance War, but even that is relatively limited. You know, typically people will still lean, you know, Torch, Scorpion, Titania if you need buff immune, something else. He's definitely a good champion with a ton going on, but that does not make a champion great. As I said, Psycho Man has like 30 abilities, you know. He has power control, he has ability accuracy reduction, power gains, different debuffs, all that stuff. Doesn't matter, he's just not good enough. Similar with Jubilee, you know. Jubilee has like 30 abilities in her base kit, and people use pretty much exactly none of them, or pretty much exactly nothing. And whilst Quicksilver obviously isn't as bad as Jubilee, his problems aren't quite as high there, but I think it's the combination of the very relatively complex playstyle. It just seems that it's quite a lot of effort and kerfuffle to go through in order to achieve something. And then if something does go wrong, you know, then it goes basically back to start one to start ramping it up. And so yeah, I think he definitely also was a champion that got overhyped from community choice winning champions. You know, you can applaud that idea designers had, but I wouldn't necessarily call it a super successful one in comparison to best champions of year 2022. That said, obviously he has presence in the game, partially due to his high prestige. A lot of people ranked him immediately because of it, similar to like Baron Zemo and iDoom. And yeah, partially some defensive utility. But let's face it, if he was an easy defender, like nobody would ever put him in Battlegrounds deck. Just saying. Anyways, let's move on. And the theme kind of continues because spot number 9 is gonna go to... Where is she? Meg Sentinel. Now, Meg Sentinel, I like her a lot, but I can't deny that she has lost quite significant levels of hype and ground since her release, and she was yet again one more of those champions that got a lot of attention initially due to her high prestige and a ton of abilities. And she is a good champion without a doubt. There are plenty of times when you do want to have access to Omega Sentinel in Alliance War. There are some specific metas where she does great in Battlegrounds and in questing situations as well. She can be amazing. There are, however, you know, things that kind of have slipped through. For instance, her criminally low health pool, in combination with the fact that once you have gotten used to fighting her, she's a relatively garbage defender, for instance. She's definitely nowhere near as defensively capable as she initially seemed. In most cases, yeah, just gets nuked down whenever she does get thrown on defense because people needed to get used to fighting her and they realized that, you know, you do some medium combos, weave in a heavy attack, take one of the special attack hits on your block for her to reduce the amount of armor she has, you're golden. And then offensively, she does do very well for Alliance War because of her like ability to bypass miss and nullify immunity and access to heal block, and all of those are like very solid bits of utility that are relatively easy to access. The things where she does suffer is that number one, a lot of people get too greedy with her and therefore think she's like super hard to play. But again, in context of Alliance War, if you're not rushing, she's perfectly safe and manageable. In, however, content like Battlegrounds, she's just quite not fast enough in most situations, especially in kind of like clear metas. There's still a lot to her kit, and I really do like the character, but if half a year ago, maybe a bit more, she would be one of my top 3 choices for a rank 5 tech champion, maybe. Definitely isn't there anymore. And happens to champions. Sometimes they, you know, increase in popularity over time. Sometimes they decrease in popularity over time. And I think Omega Sentinel undoubtedly has decreased her presence in the game and overall popularity, still being a very good champion. I do think that a lot of people at this point actually are underestimating Omega Sentinel. Right, let's move on to the next champion, and that will be Titania. Titania is definitely, again, opposite of that. When Titania was released, nobody really didn't care about her too much. Then over time, we started to see people using her more and more, and she does more and more crazy things. There are several, you know, cheese tactics available with her, with several crazy node interactions, and then people realized her level 3 nuke tactic, which makes her, you know, a very safe option to nuke the biggest Mystic champions in the game. And at this point, I would probably argue that she's one of the 2 best buff immune champions in the game, and she's also very straightforward to play. Obviously, access to 7-star Titania has only increased her popularity, but even before that, she was making gains in a game. We do see Titania used relatively frequently in Alliance War. We do see her used frequently in Battlegrounds. We do see her used in challenging content, in new story content. And yeah, she's better than a lot of people gave her credit for. And it is quite as simple as that. Her haymakers are awesome bit of utility that you can escape from in many dangerous situations. Obviously, ability to spam debuffs, that is also super useful, and because of it, because of her reducing opponent's combat power rate, you can rush to your level 3 quicker and then just spam heavy attacks and pretty much nuke anything down. Another cool thing that she got recently is synergy with Absorbing Man, which makes her immune to bleed effects, so gives her some nice access to quite an important immunity there as well. That is for Alliance War. I know for a fact, helped me to use her for like a hazard shift lane, section 2, so that is also helpful. And in general, yeah, I think Titania is very powerful, good addition to Science class, and I rank her in spot number 8. Spot number 7 is a champion that perhaps climbed the most in the last rankings, but it also kind of makes sense because he was one of the newer champions at the time, and it is Spider-Man Supreme. Now, the critiques of Spider-Man Supreme are still very, very straightforward. He is a Mystic champion without any actual buff control, which can be frustrating, not even access to neutralize, and also he has one of the bottom 10 HPs in a game, so if you do mess up, you feel it in your bones. At the same time, his phasing mechanic is one of the most annoying phasing mechanics in a game for defensive uses, so despite his tiny health pool, he can be a very troublesome opponent to take down if opponent doesn't have like a perfect counter, especially if there are any nodes that limit your parries or stun ability in general. So he has proved himself to be quite annoying defender despite his tiny health pool. And then it turns out that his offensive capabilities are bigger and better than we initially thought. Obviously, he is one of the best champions to deal with artificial power gain because he just reduces the power gain by default by a minimum of third, but in most matchups by like 66%, if not 100%, based on whether opponents have access to buffs. But the coolest thing is that his buffs and his blessings and everything else are unaffected by ability accuracies. And because of that, it turns out he a very good domino counter. It turns out he bypasses neutralize, and it just seems to find him more and more applications. And yeah, I have been seeing more and more of this guy as a solid dual purpose champion. We see him used in Alliance for defense more so than offense. Part of it is because of his tiny health pool. He's a relatively risky attacker for something like Alliance War. But when it comes to questing and battlegrounds and rest of the game, people seem to be loving this guy more and more. And also the top players of the game definitely, you know, are investing in this guy, are paying attention to him, are using him efficiently, and you should too, in my opinion. Not the easiest one to play, but quite awesome. And yeah, I already mentioned like random matchups that he can get done that people would not expect him to do. Like he's quite good against Borg, for instance, because he can get openings with his miss mechanic, and then he's very good against Domino. He can do that fight extremely well. He actually can deal with Rintras because lies. Again, so on and so forth. He's definitely growing on people more and more, in my opinion, and I wanted to reflect that. Moving on, spot number 6 is gonna go Spot. And I know Spot is one of the favorite champions for the community, and he is very, very solid champion in the sense that he has offensive and defensive uses. You see Spot being used in most of the game modes. Questing, Alliance War, offense, defense, Battlegrounds, offense, defense. And he definitely does put in work as one of the faster science nukes. And that is absolutely true, as well as solid defender. I do have some issues with Spot, but in general, he is growing on me more and more. I have placed him a couple places higher than I did previously. And obviously, when it comes to Battlegrounds, he is one of the faster science attackers on offense. However, there are obviously inherent weaknesses and problems with Spot's playstyle, like how he can be relatively AI dependent. It's very easy to get screwed over when you use Spot against several different opponents. Also, his playstyle dictates you to be taking block damage, and that is one of the kind of like more annoying things around Spot, to be honest, especially with the release of 7 stars and everybody using block penetration. He definitely has lost a bit of value, in my opinion, with the release of 7 stars and their block penetration stats. And it's not a major problem if you already have a spot, but gaining that first spot often can be quite painful. That said, we all know what Spot does. He's an offensive nuke with relatively limited utility, but what I do like most about the character is that he can make, and he does make, the absolute best from his untouchable mechanic by allowing himself to find creative openings, by being able to basically, phase through an entire special attack with that, and obviously then transfer that into a nice nuke mechanic. He does need to be awakened and relative and very high sig for this to work properly. But if AI cooperates, you get a lot of hits in your portal block. Then even a level 1 can have a devastating amount of damage. So yeah, I know that there are people who will, have a go at me for not placing him higher, but I do feel that this is relatively fair placement for him. I think he's very, very, very good champion, as will be every single one of the champions following this ranking. Every single one of the top 6 champions, I think, are kind of like head and shoulders above the rest. And I can accept that you'd argue Spot, take third or fourth place, but in my opinion, the top 6 is the real kind of, acknowledgement of these champions' power, because there is quite significant difference, I think, from Spot like 1 to 6, then from 7 to like 14 and below that. And Spot is one of the more successful releases last year, for sure. But number 5 goes to the Big Cow. Now, the Big Cow lost a couple of places, and that is kind of expected as a tank because, well, as with anything that presents the biggest defensive challenge, people are just becoming more and more adept at dealing with it and finding and discovering new champions, new ways, new strategies how to deal with Rintra. And Rintra has went from a champion that initially, when placed on defense, was almost guaranteed to give you like 80, 90 second, matches, to a point where he often now goes, in most cases, in like 50, 45, 60 seconds, because people have caught on, the exact perfect rotation of Scorpion. People have caught on, the fact that you can nuke it down with Ghost, or Spider Ham can take him down ridiculously quick. And it's just that people are becoming more adept. And with that, I think that, the longer defensive champion exists in a game, with a couple of exceptions, the less defensive value those champions have by a slight amount. On top of that, obviously, he still retains a fair amount of value offensively, and ultimately, buck for buck, Rintra is still extremely solid investment as a dual-purpose champion. The second best neutralized champion, and that neutralize ability is still extremely relevant and powerful, and can let you answer a ton of problems. And yeah, defensively, he's just a big time waster and a big beefy health pool with massive HP. And in general, absolutely love the champion. What's the best way to explain it? I'm not as hype about Rintra as I was, within 5 months ago or so, but I still definitely see his value, both offensively, both defensively. I use myself Rintra virtually all the time in almost all of my Battlegrounds decks. I have used Rintra on offense in Alliance War. Every Alliance War defense basically includes Rintra as well. And he's a definition of a powerful, successful release in the contest, in my opinion. So Rintra goes to spot number 5. And what's better than that? Well, for number 4, I'm going to give to Valkyrie. And Valkyrie has just gone from strength to strength to strength to strength. There's a very good reason why a lot of people compare her to Quake, in terms of her ability to bypass defenders' abilities or nodes by basically just finishing those fights, striking opponent's block only. That's kind of like a relatively recent trend, what people are doing with Valkyrie, and it's just amazing. Ultimately, her damage is also insane if you do play her as aggressive as possible. And again, her ability to just get rid of champions in a fast fashion is not to be understated. But that really just gives her value and worth in battlegrounds. But she's so much more than that, because she's also one of the best Alliance war attackers with without having any immunities, effectively being the perfect hazard chip champion, because you just hit opponent's block. Yes, you take a bit longer, but you can nuke down virtually anybody. And then there's just another whole plethora of champion abilities and nodes that you bypass with Valkyrie. And then obviously added cool factors of her being able to be stun immune or completely ignore unstoppable are not to be underestimated as well. And yeah, I do think that Valkyrie is probably the best skill addition in recent years. A lot of people are kind of now comparing Valkyrie with Kate, which is 2023 champion. And I do think that Valkyrie is better overall. Not by much. I love both of them tremendously. But Valkyrie is just a monster. An absolute machine. And I don't think anybody can deny her presence in every relevant game mode. And every top tier player uses her. It's kind of like a must now, and there's no getting around it. Valkyrie is just an absolute beefcake. So what's about that? Well, this is also debatable, to be honest, because I could definitely see an argument of putting Valkyrie as high as second, maybe. But moving on, spot number 3, and I'm still gonna give it to Galen. And Galen obviously has made a very big splash, very big impact in the game, and that is extremely deserved. Ironically, I think there are like just two really important things that make him as powerful as he is. Everything else around him, I think, is perfectly fine and balanced. The two things that make him incredibly OP is, number one, is damage delivery method. It not being energy damage, it not being physical damage, it being straight up direct damage that pretty much nobody and nothing is immune to, aside from like, a couple of champions that Bam is working on right now, probably, like Future Ant-Man that just got released. And therefore, he just takes on incredibly large amount of matchups and does it very well. The second thing that makes him so OP is the fact that he's Cosmic Champion that's incredibly buff heavy, but completely immune to Nullify, allowing him to completely ignore a crap ton of nodes and a crap ton of opponent abilities. And he's fairly unique like that. Even Adam Warlock, who came out obviously recently, doesn't have anywhere close to as powerful kind of like protection or nullification immunity abilities, because they have activation conditions and stuff like that. And then on top of it all the added extras, his access to ungodly amount of buffs, his access to regen and unstoppable and incinerate and immunity to power modification, make sure that he is one of the top options for a wide variety of fights and scenarios. I also do like the fact that he has kind of like his niches in game, and then he has type of fights where he's definitely not the best option. Like, he's definitely not the greatest champion in long-term fights, any long-term fights, unless there's lots of armor ups involved or some other alternate way of him ramping up. Because he can deliver incredible amount of damage, but then there's no progression further. Then you get sent back to kind of like square one, and you need to build it up again. And by nature of his ramp ups, there are just better options for longer fights. So, like, as a great example is, in shorter fight, I'd 1000% pick Galen against Penny, and he would be faster. But if you're talking about like Penny Parker Act 8.2 boss, I'd 100% pick Hulkling, because Hulkling deals with larger health pools better. So I do like that he's not all powerful. Was still relatively surprising that Kabam left him completely alone, especially considering how Kabam now is tinkering with virtually every champion that they have released in the last couple of months. So I think he kind of got quite lucky there. And yeah, I'm putting in Galen at spot number 3. Spot number 2, I am giving to Scorpion. And the man's just a monster, and there are people still who underestimate him, but he truly, truly is second best science champion in the game, and I don't think there's much argument that says otherwise. He has access to 3 different immunities, which, okay, granted, not all 3 of them at the same time, but you can pick and choose and customize. One of the coolest things about him is that you have access to 3 different damage over time effects, and all 3 of those damage over time effects completely fulfill different purposes. Like, we have poison, that is direct damage and can reduce healing. We have shock, that is energy damage, and you can capitalize on champions with negative energy resistance. And then you have Rupture, which is physical damage, and you can capitalize on champions with negative physical resistance. So for every scenario, there's kind of like the best type of debuff. And then everything else just comes together for Scorpion with his ability to access ungodly amounts of damage when synergized up, or if you are going for your heavy charge level 2s. Even without all of that, he still has incredible amount of damage for short to medium fights if you just play him super aggressively with your like level 2s and level 1s. And then obviously access to taunt. We all know how important and useful taunt. Access to petrify, and then if he's awakened, access to regen and ability block unblockable special attacks. All of those abilities are super important, and putting them together in like this one mega effective compact package just creates close to a perfect science champion that's not game-breakingly busted. I think Scorpion is as good as you can make a science champion without it being completely broken. And that is why he's the second best science champion, because the top science champion is just ungodly broken. And there will be people who always want to argue that Scorpion is better than Human Torch. He isn't. And the reason he isn't is very simple. When new content gets designed, it does not get designed around Scorpion. It gets designed around champions like Hercules and Human Torch. Now let's say Magneto and stuff like that. Those are kind of like the most busted abilities. In terms of Magneto, he's not as dominant in the game just because he's not as fast, but Torch is, and that's the problem, because Torch just nukes down anything unless you protect them from Torch, basically. So yeah, I do think that Scorpion is as good as you can create a science champion in this game without, it being completely busted that every other new piece of content needs to be balanced around Scorpion. And that's very high praise. And that's also the reason why I took him to rank 5. He's my first science rank 5, and he's freaking amazing. And the final champion is Hulkling. And initially, when Hulkling got released and Galen got released shortly before or after, everybody always wanted to ask, like, who's better, Hulkling or Galen, Hulkling or Galen? And initially, I effectively said that both pretty much the same. And there isn't much difference between them, but I do believe that ultimately Hulkling is better. And the reason why Hulkling is better is because he's much more straightforward to use and equally flexible, I would say, or almost as flexible. Both Hulkling and Galen have plenty of defensive value as well. But the way Hulkling just blitzes through fights and then does much of the similar things that Galen does, I think kind of puts Hulkling a bit ahead. Hulkling is just more user-friendly, and I think the critical aspect there is if you make a mistake in Galen's rotation, you can kind of mess up quite drastically. Or if your burst is just a bit too short, it significantly extends the fights or can land you in very, very big troubles. With Hulkling, you don't really have those problems. With Hulkling, as soon as you get to those level 2s, you just start nuking and you do not stop. So I still believe that Hulkling is the best champion released. I believe there were several Battlegrounds tournament stats where basically Hulkling had the best performances offensively and defensively, and he was like one of the most drafted champions. And similarly in Alliance War, Hulkling is pretty much a mainstay defender. Yes, you do need to protect him from Mystic champions, but still, he can be extremely troublesome. He's definitely, you know, a staple Alliance War attacker, for sure. And then he's also one of those champions that's extremely easy to put on your questing team and just get a ton of content done. Yeah, super efficient, super easy to use, and has established himself virtually everywhere in the game. I don't think there is like any area in the game where people are like, yeah, Hulkling's not good for it. Or no, he's good everywhere, very good everywhere, and he's a very, very scary champion. So that's where I stand at the moment. These are my rankings, and those were my reasons for ranking those champions where I did. And now, well, let's pull them up here, and you guys can compare how they have changed from when I did these rankings half a year ago. But yes, number 1, Hulkling, number 2, Scorpion, number 3, Galen, 4, Valkyrie, 5, Rintra, 6, Spot, 7, Spider-Man Supreme, 8, Titanium, 9, Omega Sentinel, 10, Quicksilver, 11, Black Cat, 12, iDoom. Now, go ahead, tear me apart, because I don't even care. My mouth is dry and I have been talking for 40 minutes straight without a single cut or a break. See you next time, guys. Bye. Hello there, guys, and welcome back to the channel. So we have all the information about